to Mate's Kitchen. Today we're going to be cooking one of my favorite comfort foods, pot roast. So the most important part about a good pot roast is the roast. Now this one is a chuck roast. I love a good fatty chuck roast. You can also do a bottom round, top round. There's a lot of different ones. My dad always goes with the leanest cut he can find, and I always go with the fattiest cut because that's where the flavor is. But the main thing is you can take any really tough cut of meat, and through a long and slow cooking process, you can really tenderize that meat. Now, I'm just gonna put some salt and pepper down on my board and roll the edges as well because we wanna really salt this thing down. Salt heavier than you think you're gonna need. Now these little salt cups I've got, I will dump this salt out whenever I'm done. I'll dump this pepper out and wash them when I'm done because I dip my hands back in and forth several times as I'm doing this meat. And I don't save that because I don't want to cross-contaminate another dish, but I try to put in just about what I think I'm gonna need for whatever I'm doing. And it makes it a lot easier than sitting there with a salt shaker and meaty hands all back and forth over it. So now that our roast is good and salted, we're gonna set this aside. This is the first part I always start with because this thing needs to come up to some temperature. Got a salt and pepper, that's gonna draw some of that out, some of that moisture out of there, and then we're going to set this aside. We're gonna slice up some celery, and one thing about this is you're gonna want longer or bigger pieces. The bigger the chunks you cut in, this stuff is gonna be in the crock pot for 3 or 4 hours. This is the original one pot meal here. So instead of dicing small, like I would for an oven braise or something like that, where I would fry it beforehand, I'm kind of making big chunks of everything I put in there. And not as much doing it for looks because that's the one thing about comfort food is it's here to taste good, not necessarily look that great all the time. At least that's kind of the way it's been in my family, and what I've seen is this stuff is gonna taste amazing, but it might just look like, you know, some roast and full veggies on a plate. And I've got 2 shallots here. So I'll take these shallots, and if it's a really big shallot, I'll normally just quarter one, but I'm gonna quarter 2 of these. A little more difficult to peel, just getting how to use my thumb again. So I'll put my shallots where I put my garlic. I'll show you what I do there. We're gonna stuff these kind of in the folds of the roast. So I'll leave them just, again, going with the bigger pieces. I'm just gonna cut them in kind of quarters. We'll set them up here at the side. Then I'll take my onion and I'm just gonna quarter that thing. Well, this one is a really fat onion. I would normally just quarter the onion, but I'll probably do this in 6ths or something. So I'll just take a quarter of the onion. And these are big chunks, but again, this stuff's gonna be in the pot for 3 hours. So we don't want to. Little tiny pieces will just be mush by the end of them. The last thing we're gonna do is smash this garlic. Get this big clove out. And I'm gonna get 6 of these garlic cloves, or somewhere around there. So if I was using a long carrot, I'd dice up a long carrot as well, but I always use the sweet baby carrots. So this is all the veggies we'll need. Let's go to the stove and start our sear, and then we'll come back to these. Okay, so I've got my Smithy cast iron here, and I'm gonna drop a big bunch of ghee in it and let this start to cook down here. You can see it already starting to smoke. I've got this pan really good and warm. You can see this thing is hot, it's popping. And we're gonna just drop this thing in here. Now, if there was a fat anywhere around this, probably the most fat, I'll stick that down first, let it render a little bit of that off. Because the more fat we get off this thing, the better. So instead of just letting it flat, we're gonna render some of that off in the bottom of the pan here. I'll let it sit about a minute here. But I'm practically frying this in the ghee, as much ghee as I put in here. And you don't have to do that, but it makes it a lot easier to get a good even sear because this meat's so, you know, kind of bumpy and different textured. Here, you can kind of see what we're watching for. If you look under there, you'll see it starting to brown just a little bit, right on the edges. And that's what we're looking for, is that good golden color. So roll it off of here a little bit. get rid of that. Oh yeah. Sides are done. We're gonna lay this thing flat in here now. Oh yeah. And you can see this thing is hot because it's still, the pan's still smoking. Now one thing I love about my chuck roast is if you look up here in the top, there's all these big crevices between where the fat comes into this meat. So for one, that's going to be loaded with flavor. But what else? This is where I'm going to tuck all those 6 cloves of garlic and those shallots. That's where I'm going to tuck them. It's inside this meat here. So that's going to be just infusing the whole time it cooks. And then my veggies is going to be on a bed of the carrots, and then the veggies surrounding the outside. So this is not something you're going to look at and it's going to be like, that's the most beautiful plating, that's the most beautiful food. This is comfort food. You're going to pull this thing out of the crock pot after you've been at work all day, and you're going to be like, man, that tastes amazing. Because this is all about flavor. It is not about looks, it's all about flavor. You'll be very careful. You don't want to drop this thing down in all that grease and start your fire, so I keep enough pressure on it that way. I found it's easier for me to move a big chunk of meat with these things than it is to try to do it with my tongs. This thing is just heavy. Look at that, just char all the way around the outside, just that good crust. And you can just see how hard that is. This is going to be beautiful once it's slow cooked and all the insides cooked as well. You're going to have all the beautiful flavor of this seared fat and seared meat on the outside. So I'm going to pull this thing out of here. Make sure, oh, just look at this. If you can see that crust on there, listen, they do this on TikTok, I've seen them. Just look at this crust. That is just going to be so amazing. And yes, I put it back on the dirty cutting board because it's not cooked yet. We're literally going to put this in the crock pot for 6 more hours or so. So it's perfectly fine that I'm going back on the same cutting board and not dirtying 2 cutting boards. So the first thing that most people mess up on their roast is too much liquids. I'm going to literally add a 1/2 cup. Max, a lot of times I'll add 3/4 cup, but this is really fatty. If you've got a leaner cut, you can go up to a cup. But just a little 1/2 cup of broth, and it's very little broth in the bottom because when we were growing up, a lot of times my family would just cover the roast in water and no veggies with it, and the meat would be a lot tougher when it finished cooking, and that's not what I'm looking for. I want that really soft meat. Carrots are the hardest of the vegetables that go in, so I always put them on the bottom, kind of a bed of carrots, and it keeps the meat from sitting right on the bottom. And they'll turn out just perfect after about 6 hours on high or about 8 to 10 hours on low heat. And I'm gonna put my roast in. Now this is just seared, it's not cooked. So and that roast just kind of sits right on top of that bed of carrots. It's got that pockets all the way around it. Now that's where we're really gonna get involved here. I'm gonna take this garlic, and I'm actually gonna flip this over first because this is my favorite side. So I'm gonna put it on the top because that's gonna stay brown. And I'm going to go into the folds of the meat, and I'm going to shove these garlics. Now, you can honestly just throw this garlic in the pan. For me, I like sticking it in here because I feel like it does something. If you think it doesn't, don't worry about it. Just throw them in the pan, but I like sticking it down in the meat and then trying to find those pieces of meat when it comes out. And then I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on the top side. All those little crevices, just pack them full of flavor where that fat is. Cloves of garlic here, and these cloves of garlic after they've set in there, I like to eat them. You can find them back in the whole. That's why I keep them in whole cloves instead of using minced garlic, because these things are just amazing to taste afterwards. Good shell pieces, and then next I will dump my 4 onion squares, and I'll put 1 on each corner here, just off the side wall, and I leave them whole in the big things because I used to break them apart in there, but these things get so mushy that they almost just disintegrate into nothing and you can't eat them. Whereas like this, you'll still have a little chunk of onion to eat when it's done. Then I'm going to surround that with my celery. And then the last part, and this is the part that most people complain about, is their potatoes get mushy. 2 things happen. 1, you've got potatoes too low down in there, or 2, you got too much liquid and your potatoes boil or simmer for 6 or 8 hours. So I'm gonna put my potatoes around the top here, and they'll still be, and I also use Yukon Golds. So I'm just gonna, like I said, I'm just gonna put these around the outside at the top. Let me arrange them a little more. And they're really more just kind of steaming through the process and all the flavors of this. And we pull them out, you can mash them with a fork, but there's still enough firmness to them you actually can enjoy the potato. The red potatoes tend to break down a lot more for me in roast, so I generally don't use the red potatoes. I never use cut potatoes. Every time I've ever used cut potatoes, once you cut that skin, they just get so mushy. So I've always used just whole of the little yellow gold ones, and they work the best for me. But feel free to tell me something else you've tried if it works better in the comments down there. And then my wife's favorite part, if I forget this, she kills me, but my Parmesan rinds. I actually mentioned this back on my chicken Alfredo video when I was shredding the parm. And this is the Parmigiano Reggiano. I will stick some of these Parmesan rinds around the outside, preferably near the onion, because that's where you get that really good flavor, or near one of the garlic cloves. If there's an extra one that I've thrown on the outside, stick them around in there, and they will, once this thing starts to broth up, they will just kind of melt into that broth, and there will be just a little chunk of cheesy parm goodness in there. And my wife is crazy for the parm chunks, so I started doing it every time. I just did it one time to try it, and now it's a tradition. So now, this is my favorite part of the roast, is I will take typical pieces of Irish butter, put them on top, then a handful of thyme, probably a little less than that, and then a bit of rosemary. And this, kind of on the outside near the potatoes, this butter will kind of melt off and run through these potatoes with this thyme and rosemary, and it'll infuse such flavor into all of the vegetables. Because everything about this, it honestly looks prettier now than it will ever look. This is the prettiest this thing will look, is when it's just surrounded by these veggies and surrounded with the herbs and butter, and then you cook it and it comes out just a big old ball of amazing meat. But this is what we're gonna eat. Another thing about comfort food is it's just simple. I mean, if you think about what's in here: salt, pepper, beef broth, and then, you know, 5 or 6 kinds of veggies. You can change those up, add peppers, things like that, whatever else you want for your veggies to add the flavor you want. And another thing is the simplicity. I mean, we're literally gonna put a lid on this thing. And when I was a cop, this was one of the meals I would make. I would put it on low right when I left, and it'd be 10 or 12 hours in the pot. We would pop it out for supper a little bit before I got home, and supper would be ready. Supper, something she didn't have to worry about, and it would be ready before I ever left the house. And when I came home, there'd still be some for me. Okay, so it's not been 6 hours yet. I have another crock pot, and now we're going to take a look at the roast I did this morning. All right, so with the other roast I made this morning, I cooked this one on high for 6 hours. One thing I did was I took a couple different kinds of potatoes to show you the difference, because I've done this several times and learned. But here's one of the black potatoes. Here's one of the Yukon Golds. And I think there's a red potato in here somewhere, but I don't see it. That might be it. But I don't know if you can see this on camera or not. This Yukon Gold, it's still very buttery, and it's not grainy or overdone in any way. It tastes really just full of flavor. This black potato, I've never tried before, but they have it assorted, and you can tell it's almost like pasty. It's papery. It's just falling apart. It's not coming together. This is like mashed potato consistency. It's still very rubbery and stick, and I don't know how you describe potatoes. Not really rubbery. Still creamy. And this one's more like just broken up and grainy, which is similar to kind of what the red potato is. The red potato just has that overcooked texture. It's still got great flavor, but for me, the Yukon Gold just keeps the best texture in that pot roast all day. And you're welcome to do it however you like, but that's kind of been my experience. The way I normally use is just a big old flat grill spatula, and I will try to get under that roast so that I can keep it as much as one piece, because this is truly just fall apart meat. And just stick it on the plate right in the middle, and then I'll remove my aromatics, because those are really just aromatics. Also, this is a great way if you want to use this broth to make a gravy. You just literally strain your vegetables out and add a little bit of cornstarch, reduce it in a pan, or you can actually make a cornstarch slurry if you want to. Reduce this. Now right here is the good part coming out. See all the carrots and potatoes, and then typically you'll just kind of surround it with all the veggies around it for people to pick through. And then what my wife is really looking for is these. And when it cools down, I'll show you the parm rinds. So if you were to come to eat Sunday dinner in the South, at some point during the year, this is what you're going to get served. And you know, I don't know how regional that is, but I know that this is a staple around here. And what you're probably gonna have for sides with it, you're probably gonna have some corn, you're probably gonna have some mashed potatoes. I know there's potatoes in it. We still make mashed potatoes because why not? Sweet potato pie, a lot of different, you know, sides may go with this. To me, this looks beautiful because I know what it tastes like, and I hope that you can see a little bit of that in there. Or if you've eaten pot roast before, you need to try this recipe because you are not going to get a better one than this. A lot of great memories around a plate just like this, and I'm making a lot more memories like this with my kids as well, but I can't wait to dig in. I will go ahead and show you the first thing. I said I would show you this. So Parmesan rind, if you've ever messed with them, are very hard. They're kind of untenable, but after this, a lot of that Parmesan is kind of made its way through the dish, but these little chunks are my wife's highlight. I'm gonna eat one of hers anyways here. There's just a hint of Parmesan left in it, and it's very tender. It's loaded with all the flavors of that beef, the vegetables that were around it. I can taste a little bit of onion with that one. A little bit of garlic. It's just truly just a little nugget of goodness kind of buried in there for the few that find one. You can honestly just take it with a fork and just kind of tear it off, or 2 forks. And this is kind of how my dad would always do it. And you can just see, I mean, it just falls right apart, and you still got that great crust there. I suppose you can cut it with a knife, but there's really no need to when the meat's this tender. And you can just see that dark burgundy of the meat and just how soft it is. Oh, this is so good. This is probably one of my favorite meals come fall. This is probably one of the meals that I most look forward to. I don't know why I don't do it more in the summer, but as soon as comfort food season starts coming in and I start getting ready to wear a hoodie and not care about how fat I am, not that I lose any weight during the summer, this is what I look forward to. Little big old glob of those onions in there. Wow. There's nothing like how tender such a tough cut of meat can turn. And these outside, where it's been seared and it's got that black on there. So go to the grocery store, come home and spend 20 minutes throwing this in the crock pot before work, and when you get home, you're gonna thank me later.